The sweltering African sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah Linfield wiped beads of sweat from her forehead. 6 months into her wildlife conservation research in Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve, the 32-year-old zoologist from Colorado had witnessed countless wonders of nature, but nothing had prepared her for what would happen that day. Sarah had been tracking the famous Syrian pride for her doctoral research on lion social dynamics. The pride was well known among researchers and safari guides, 12 lions in total, led by a magnificent male with a dark mane named Bahati, which meant lucky one in Swahili. For weeks, Sarah had maintained a respectful distance, observing through binoculars and documenting their behaviors from the safety of her research vehicle. That morning had started like any other. Sarah left the research camp at dawn, accompanied by Mutua, her experienced local guide and driver. Their plan was to locate the pride, which they had last seen near the Talek River the previous evening. "But we should check the eastern bank first," Mutua suggested, as he navigated the rugged terrain with practiced ease. "The grass is shorter after the controlled burn last month. Good hunting ground for the pride." Sarah nodded in agreement, jotting notes in her weathered field journal. The research vehicle bumped along the uneven dirt track, sending small clouds of red dust into the air behind them. They found the pride exactly where Mutua had predicted. Through her binoculars, Sarah counted 9 lions lounging in the shade of an acacia tree. Bahati, 5 adult females, and 3 nearly grown cubs from the previous year's litter. But something was wrong. Sarah had documented 11 lions in the pride just yesterday. "2 are missing," she murmured to Mutua, the youngest female, and one of the cubs. As they scanned the area, Mutua suddenly pointed toward the river. "Look there, by the water." Sarah adjusted her binoculars. About 400 yards away, she could make out the form of the missing female lion. She appeared to be in distress, pacing back and forth along the riverbank. "Something's wrong," Sarah said. "Let's get closer, but keep a safe distance." Mutua carefully drove them closer to the river. As they approached, they could hear the lioness's distress calls, deep throaty grunts that pierced the morning air. "She's looking for something in the water," Mutua observed, his voice tense. "I think it might be her cub." Sarah's heart sank as she realized what was happening. The recent heavy rains had caused the Talek River to swell, creating stronger currents than usual, if the cub had fallen in. "There," she gasped, pointing toward a small, struggling form being carried downstream. "The cub is in the water." Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her satellite phone and jumped out of the vehicle. "What are you doing?" Mutua called after her, alarmed. "Sarah, stop. It's too dangerous." But Sarah was already sprinting toward the river. Years of emergency training as a wilderness first responder kicked in, overriding the rational part of her brain that would have reminded her of the foolishness of approaching a distressed wild animal, let alone one of Africa's most formidable predators. She could hear Mutua shouting behind her, but his words were lost in the rush of adrenaline. The lioness saw her approaching and backed away from the riverbank, growling and warning. Sarah slowed her pace, making herself appear as non-threatening as possible. "It's okay," she said softly, knowing the lioness couldn't understand her words, but hoping her calm tone would help. "I'm going to help your baby." The lioness continued to growl, but didn't charge. Sarah reached the riverbank and could now clearly see the lion cub struggling against the current about 30 feet from shore. Its tiny head barely remained above water, and its desperate mewling cries were growing weaker by the second. Sarah knew that lions, unlike tigers, generally avoided water and were not strong swimmers. The mother was clearly distressed, but instinctively afraid to enter the fast-moving river. Without further hesitation, Sarah waded into the water. The cool current tugged at her legs as she pushed forward, keeping her eyes fixed on the struggling cub. The water quickly rose to her waist, then her chest, as she navigated toward the deeper center of the river. "I'm coming," she whispered, more to calm herself than the cub. "Hold on, little one." The cub was barely moving now, its strength clearly fading. When Sarah finally reached it, she gently cradled the small body, no larger than a house cat but surprisingly dense with muscle, and turned back toward shore. The cub didn't resist, a worrying sign of its exhaustion. It was then that Sarah realized the full gravity of her situation. The mother lioness was pacing nervously at the shoreline, her amber eyes fixed on Sarah and her cub. Behind her, to Sarah's horror, the rest of the pride had appeared, apparently drawn by the mother's distress calls. Even Bahati, the magnificent male, stood watching from a small ridge overlooking the river. Sarah felt a cold wave of fear that had nothing to do with the river water. She was now chest-deep in a river, holding a lion cub, with the entire pride watching her every move from the shore. One wrong move, one misinterpreted action, and she could trigger a deadly attack. "Mutua," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Tell the camp to send backup now." She could see Mutua in the distance, already on the satellite phone. He gave her a thumbs-up sign, indicating help was on the way, but Sarah knew that any assistance would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. Until then, she was on her own. She continued wading toward the shore, moving slowly and deliberately. The cub in her arms coughed up water but remained worryingly still. Sarah could feel its heartbeat against her chest, rapid but steady. "Stay back," Mutua shouted to her from the safety of the vehicle. "Don't go ashore yet." But Sarah knew she had no choice. The cub needed immediate attention, and she couldn't provide it while standing in the river. Taking a deep breath, she continued forward until her feet touched the muddy riverbank. The mother lioness growled, a deep rumbling sound that Sarah felt more than heard. The other lions remained perfectly still, watching. Sarah had studied lion behavior extensively, but nothing in her research had prepared her for this situation. She was violating every safety protocol in the field researcher's handbook. As she stepped fully onto the shore, water streaming from her clothes, Sarah made a critical decision. Instead of trying to retreat with the cub, which might trigger the mother's protective instincts, she would return the cub directly. "I'm bringing your baby back," she said softly, taking a tentative step forward. The mother lioness flattened her ears against her head and crouched slightly, a posture that could precede an attack. Sarah froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the lions could hear it, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Sarah stood motionless, the dripping cub clutched gently in her arms. The mother lioness's eyes never left hers. Then, with deliberate slowness, Sarah knelt and placed the cub on the ground before her. The tiny lion wobbled unsteadily but remained standing. It coughed up more water, then let out a small, pitiful mewl. The sound seemed to break the tension. The mother lioness immediately responded with a chuffing noise, a non-threatening vocalization that lions use with their cubs. To Sarah's immense relief, the cub began tottering toward its mother. As it reached her, the lioness immediately began grooming it with her rough tongue, checking it for injuries. But Sarah's ordeal wasn't over. She was still kneeling on the riverbank, soaking wet and surrounded by wild lions. Any sudden movement could still trigger an attack. And while the mother was occupied with her returned cub, the rest of the pride was still watching Sarah intently. Bahati, the male, began walking toward her with deliberate steps. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as Bahati approached. The massive lion, weighing close to 400 pounds, with a dark mane that signified his dominance, moved with the quiet confidence of an apex predator. Each step brought him closer, his amber eyes locked on hers. Sarah knew that running was not an option. It would only trigger his predatory instinct to chase. From the research vehicle, she could hear Mutua's voice, tense but controlled. "Don't move, Sarah. Stay completely still." She did as instructed, kneeling in the mud, her soaked clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Her mind raced through everything she knew about lion behavior. Direct eye contact could be interpreted as a challenge, so she slightly averted her gaze while still keeping Bahati in her peripheral vision. The lion was now less than 15 feet away, close enough that Sarah could hear his breathing and smell the distinctive musky odor of his coat. His size was overwhelming. His shoulder height alone was nearly 4 feet, making him appear even more massive from her kneeling position. "Please," she whispered, the word escaping involuntarily. Bahati stopped. For several heartbeats, he simply stared at her. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, he did something entirely unexpected. He slowly lowered himself into a seated position, still watching her, but with what appeared to be curiosity rather than aggression. The mother lioness had finished her initial inspection of the cub and was now looking at Sarah as well. The rest of the pride remained at a distance, their postures alert but not threatening. "Sarah," Mutua called softly from the vehicle. "I think you should start moving back very slowly. Help is on the way." Sarah knew he was right. This momentary calm was a window of opportunity she needed to seize. With deliberate slowness, she shifted her weight to rise from her kneeling position. At that exact moment, the rescued cub, apparently recovered enough from its ordeal, wobbled away from its mother and took several unsteady steps towards Sarah. "No, no," Sarah breathed, freezing in place again. This was dangerous. If the mother thought Sarah was threatening her cub, but the mother made no move to retrieve the cub or to challenge Sarah. Instead, she watched with what Sarah could only describe as tolerant attention as her offspring approached the human who had saved it. The cub came within a few feet of Sarah, its tiny face looking up at her with the innocent curiosity of the very young. In any other circumstance, the scene would have been heartwarming, but Sarah was acutely aware of the potential danger. Just then, she heard the distant rumble of approaching vehicles the backup Mutua had called for. The sound caused all the lions to look up, momentarily distracted. Sarah seized the opportunity to slowly, carefully rise to her feet. As she did, something remarkable happened. Bahati, still seated, let out a low, soft vocalization, not a growl or a roar, but a gentle chuffing sound, similar to what the mother had used with her cub. It was a non-threatening sound, typically used by lions in friendly social interactions. The mother lioness approached and gently picked up her cub by the scruff of its neck, carrying it back toward the pride. Bahati remained seated, watching Sarah for a moment longer before rising and following the mother. Sarah began backing away slowly, moving toward the river rather than toward the approaching vehicles, giving the lions a clear path to retreat. The pride began to move away as a group, unhurried, occasionally glancing back at her. By the time the backup vehicles arrived, 2 Land Rovers carrying 4 armed rangers, and the research camp's director, Dr. Martin Wells, the lions were already disappearing into the tall grass several hundred yards away. "Sarah," Dr. Wells called out as he jumped from the vehicle. "Are you hurt? What on earth were you thinking?" Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the retreating pride. "I'm fine," she said, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "The cub was drowning. I had to do something." Dr. Wells, a veteran wildlife biologist in his 50 seconds with sun-weathered skin and a gray-flecked beard, shook his head in disbelief. "You could have been killed. Do you understand that? You broke every safety protocol we have." "I know," Sarah admitted, the full weight of what she had done finally sinking in. Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she had to lean against one of the vehicles for support. But the cub would have died. The reality of the situation hit her all at once. The danger she had put herself in, the miracle of her survival, and the extraordinary interaction she had just experienced with the lions. Sarah began to shake uncontrollably as the adrenaline that had sustained her drained away. "Let's get you back to camp," Dr. Wells said, his tone softening as he noticed her condition. "You need dry clothes and probably a stiff drink." Back at the research station, after changing into dry clothes and wrapping herself in a blanket despite the heat, Sarah sat with Dr. Wells, Mutua, and the rest of the research team as they debriefed the incident. "What you did was incredibly reckless," Dr. Wells said, not for the first time, but it was also incredibly brave. "And what happened afterwards?" He shook his head in wonder. "In all my years studying lions, I've never heard of anything like it." "It was as if they understood what you did," Mutua added, "as if they knew you had saved the cub." Sarah sipped the hot tea someone had pressed into her hands. "I don't think we should anthropomorphize their behavior," she said, reverting to her scientific training. "They were likely just confused by the unusual situation. I was lucky they didn't perceive me as a threat." "Maybe," Dr. Wells conceded, "but Bahati's behavior, sitting down like that, the vocalization he made that's extremely unusual. Lions typically either retreat from humans or display threatening behavior if they feel cornered. This was something else entirely." The conversation continued well into the evening, with the team analyzing every aspect of the encounter from a scientific perspective. But privately, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had occurred, something that went beyond scientific explanation. That night, as she lay in her bunk in the research station's dormitory, Sarah replayed the events in her mind. The image of Bahati sitting before her, regarding her with those intelligent amber eyes, was particularly vivid. There had been something in that gaze, something that had felt like recognition, like understanding. Sleep eluded her. At around midnight, she got up and walked outside to the station's covered porch. The African night enveloped her, a tapestry of stars overhead, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, the earthy scent of the savannah. She had come to love this wild place during her months of research, but now she felt connected to it in a new way. "You shouldn't be out here alone," a voice said, startling her. It was Mutua, who apparently had also been unable to sleep. "I was just thinking about what happened," Sarah admitted, as he joined her at the porch railing. Mutua nodded. "The elders in my village would say the lions recognized your spirit, that you showed the courage of a lion yourself by entering the water to save the cub." Sarah smiled. Despite her scientific training, she found comfort in Mutua's traditional perspective. "So what do you think will happen when I go back to observe the pride tomorrow?" "If we go back," Mutua corrected with emphasis, "and we will not be leaving the vehicle this time." "Yes," Sarah laughed softly, "definitely not." "Then I think the lions will remember you," he said simply, "and that may change everything about your research." He was right, Sarah realized. Whether the lion's behavior had a scientific explanation or a mystical one, the dynamic had changed. She had crossed a boundary, intervened directly in their world. Her observations would never be the same. The following morning, despite Dr. Wells's suggestion that she take a day to rest, Sarah insisted on returning to the field. With Mutua driving and 2 additional researchers accompanying them as a safety precaution, they set out to locate the Syrian pride. They found them not far from yesterday's location, gathered near a cluster of acacia trees. Sarah counted carefully through her binoculars. All 12 lions were present, including the rescued cub, who appeared to be completely recovered and was playing with one of the older cubs. "They all look healthy," Sarah noted, relief evident in her voice. "The cub doesn't seem to have suffered any ill effects from the river." Through her binoculars, she observed the rescued cub tumbling playfully with its siblings. There was no sign of trauma or distress, a testament to the resilience of young wildlife. "And keep your distance today," Dr. Wells reminded her from the back seat. "Standard observation protocols. We don't want to push our luck after yesterday." Sarah nodded in agreement. Despite the extraordinary connection she'd felt with the lions the previous day, she had no intention of testing those boundaries again. They positioned the vehicle approximately 150 yards from the pride, the recommended safe distance for lion observation. As they settled in for their research session, something unexpected happened. Bahati, who had been resting in the shade, suddenly raised his head and looked directly at their vehicle. After a moment, he rose to his feet and began walking deliberately in their direction. "He's seen us," Mutua said, his hand moving instinctively to the ignition key. "Wait," Sarah said, raising her binoculars. "He's not displaying any aggressive behavior." She was right. Bahati's ears were forward, his gait relaxed. There was none of the tension or stalking posture that would indicate hostility. "This is unusual," Dr. Wells murmured, now watching through his own binoculars. "Lions typically ignore observation vehicles unless they feel threatened." Bahati continued his approach until he was about 50 yards away, still a safe distance, but closer than male lions typically came to research vehicles voluntarily. He sat down, his impressive mane catching the morning light, and simply looked at them. "Oh my God," Dr. Wells breathed. "It's almost as if he's acknowledging your presence, Sarah." The behavior was so unusual that even the typically stoic Mutua seemed amazed. "I have never seen this in all my years as a guide," he admitted. They remained still, documenting Bahati's behavior with cameras and detailed notes. After several minutes, 2 of the female lions, including the mother of the rescued cub, also approached, though they maintained a greater distance than Bahati. "The females are following his lead," Sarah observed. "Dr. Wells, this is incredible data for my research on pride dynamics." What happened over the next few weeks became the foundation for what would eventually be Sarah's groundbreaking doctoral dissertation and later her first book. The Syrian pride began to display unprecedented behaviors around her research vehicle, not just tolerance, but what could only be described as acknowledgement. They allowed her to observe them from closer distances than they permitted other researchers or tourist vehicles. The females would bring their cubs into view, seemingly deliberately, allowing Sarah to document cub-rearing behaviors rarely seen by researchers. Bahati, in particular, seemed to recognize Sarah's vehicle, occasionally approaching and sitting nearby during observation sessions. "It's as if saving that cub broke through some barrier," Dr. Wells remarked one evening as they reviewed the day's footage. "They're treating you differently from other humans. They're giving you access to their world." Sarah was careful not to overstate the case in her research notes. "While the pride displays unusual tolerance for observation, we must avoid anthropomorphizing their behavior," she wrote. "There may be environmental or coincidental factors influencing these patterns." But privately, she couldn't deny the profound sense of connection she felt with these wild creatures, particularly with Bahati and the mother of the cub she had saved. 3 months after the river incident, as Sarah's research period was drawing to a close, she experienced one final extraordinary encounter. She and Mutua had located the pride near a rocky outcropping where the lions often rested during the heat of the day. As was now their custom, they parked at a respectful distance and began their observations. After about an hour, the mother of the rescued cub separated from the group and began walking toward their vehicle, her cub following close behind. The young lion had grown noticeably in the intervening months, its spotted coat beginning to transition to the tawny adult coloration. "She's bringing the cub to us," Mutua said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. Sarah watched, barely breathing, as the lioness stopped about 30 yards from their vehicle. The cub, displaying the boundless energy of youth, raced ahead of its mother, stopping to paw at the ground and chase its own tail in a display of exuberance. For nearly 20 minutes, the mother lion sat watching as her cub played in full view of the humans, occasionally glancing up at Sarah as if to ensure she was paying attention. It was, Sarah would later write, like a deliberate introduction, a mother proudly showing off her thriving child to the person who had helped save it. Eventually, the lioness chuffed softly, and the cub obediently returned to her side. They rejoined the pride, disappearing into the tall grass. 2 days later, Sarah packed her research equipment for the final time. Her year in the Masai Mara had yielded far more data and personal growth than she could have ever anticipated. "I'll miss them," she admitted to Mutua, as they drove along the familiar routes one last time, hoping for a final glimpse of the Syrian pride. "They are part of you now," Mutua replied with the wisdom that had guided her throughout her time in Kenya. "And perhaps you are part of them as well." They found the pride near the river, not far from the spot where Sarah had rescued the cub. The lions were resting in the late afternoon sun, their golden coats blending with the savanna grasses. Sarah counted each one, noting their positions and behaviors one final time in her journal. As they watched, Bahati raised his massive head and looked directly at their vehicle. Even from a distance, Sarah felt the power of that gaze. The great lion rose to his feet, stretched, and then did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He lifted his head and delivered a full-throated roar that echoed across the landscape. One by one, the other lions joined in, creating a chorus that Sarah felt as much as heard, a vibration that seemed to connect earth and sky, human and animal. "They're saying goodbye," Mutua said softly. Sarah knew that, scientifically, the roaring was more likely a territorial display or communication between pride members. But in that moment, she allowed herself to embrace Mutua's interpretation. Some experiences went beyond scientific explanation. 6 months later, Sarah successfully defended her dissertation at the University of Colorado. Her research on the Syrian pride, particularly the unprecedented access she had gained following the cub rescue, had generated significant interest in the scientific community. Her findings challenged existing understandings of lion cognition and social recognition. "Dr. Linfield, are you suggesting that these lions recognized you as an individual and remembered your intervention?" one committee member asked during her defense. Sarah chose her words carefully. "The data shows statistically significant behavioral differences in how the pride responded to my research vehicle compared to other human presences. While we should be cautious about attributing human-like cognition to wild animals, the evidence suggests that lions may have more sophisticated social recognition capabilities than previously documented." Her dissertation was approved with distinction, and she was immediately offered a position with the African Wildlife Foundation to continue her research. She accepted without hesitation. 2 years after the river incident, Sarah returned to the Masai Mara. The Syrian pride had undergone changes. Bahati had been challenged and displaced by a younger male. 2 new litters of cubs had been born, and some of the subadult lions had left to establish their own territory. But the mother of the rescued cub was still there, now with a new litter. And remarkably, the cub that Sarah had saved, now a young adult female, remained with the pride. Mutua, who had kept track of the pride in Sarah's absence, had named her Maji, the Swahili word for water. On her first day back in the field, Sarah positioned her vehicle at the standard observation distance. Within an hour, Maji separated from the group and approached the vehicle, stopping at almost the exact same distance her mother had during Sarah's last observation 2 years earlier. There, the young lioness sat, regarding Sarah with calm, golden eyes that seemed to hold a depth of understanding impossible to articulate in scientific terms. In that moment, across the divide between human and wild, Sarah felt a connection that transcended explanation, a silent acknowledgement between two beings whose lives had intersected in an extraordinary way. "Welcome back," Mutua said softly, but Sarah knew he wasn't speaking to her. This remarkable story of cross-species connection became the cornerstone of Sarah's career. Her ongoing research with the lions of the Masai Mara has contributed significantly to conservation efforts and deepened our understanding of these magnificent predators. But more than that, it stands as a testament to the profound and mysterious bonds that can form between humans and wild animals, reminding us that in the natural world there are still wonders beyond our full comprehension.